"You're just a weak little widow now," my brother-in-law sneered, leaning over the pew right at my husband's funeral. He slid a folded document onto my lap and demanded I sign over the family estate, my husband's engineering firm and our home. His wife laughed under her breath, whispering that I had nobody left to protect me, nobody to stand in their way. I sat in pure silence, dabbing a tear from my cheek without flinching. To them, I was just the quiet, soft-spoken wife who worked vague government logistics and stayed in the background. They assumed I was utterly defenseless. They didn't know about my classified military career, my command rank, or the protocol triggered the second someone threatened an active officer's family. And they certainly didn't expect the chapel doors to burst open as 20 decorated operators from my elite unit marched in, locking down the room. My name is Diana Mercer. I am 28 years old, and on a gray Tuesday morning, I sat in the front pew of St. Jude's Chapel, staring at the mahogany casket holding my late husband, David. He had passed away suddenly from a cardiac anomaly just 5 days prior, ripping away the brightest part of my life. My world had fractured into sharp pieces, but the funeral had barely begun before the vultures decided it was time to feed. David's older brother, Julian, slipped into the seat beside me. He didn't offer a word of comfort. Instead, he slid a thick, blue-bound legal document directly onto my lap, tapping the paper with a gold signet ring. "Sign the transfer, Diana," Julian whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "David's engineering firm belongs in real Mercer hands, not with an outsider. You take the house, leave the commercial accounts to me, and we won't have to drag this through probate court." Behind him, his wife Vanessa crossed her arms, watching me with predatory satisfaction. They thought I was paralyzed by grief. They assumed that because I had always stayed quiet at family dinners and let David take center stage, I was an easy target to bully into submission. Julian leaned closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "Be smart for once. You don't have the stomach for a legal fight, and without David, you don't have anyone left in your corner." I didn't answer him right away. I merely straightened my posture, folded my hands over the papers, and watched the chapel doors. Julian and Vanessa had always fundamentally misunderstood who I was, but that was entirely by design. When David and I married 4 years ago, we made a mutual decision to keep my career strictly confidential. Under Department of Defense non-disclosure agreements, my actual rank as a captain commanding an elite tactical logistics and rapid response unit remained classified. To Julian, I was merely a docile government clerk who tended a quiet garden and supported her ambitious husband. David had built his advanced infrastructure engineering firm from the ground up through sheer brilliance and relentless work. Julian, on the other hand, had spent the last decade running failed shell companies and demanding endless family bailouts. When David was alive, Julian tried everything from forging corporate signatures to begging for high-risk loans he never intended to repay. David always stood firm, shielding our household from his brother's toxic entitlement, but he carried that quiet pain until his last breath. Now, sitting in the heavy stillness of the chapel sanctuary, I felt no panic, no urge to scream, and no impulse to break down. Years of high-stakes operational training instantly took over like muscle memory. My heart rate slowed to a steady, calculated rhythm. I clinically evaluated the room, noting the layout, assessing Julian's posture, and analyzing his threat vector. He leaned heavily on unearned arrogance, but the subtle tremor in his fingers betrayed an amateur desperate for a payday. He genuinely mistook my composure for submission, unaware that in my line of work, absolute silence is merely the precursor to decisive engagement. Julian believed he was cornering a fragile, defenseless homemaker who would roll over under pressure. He had no idea he was trying to shake down an active-duty commander who had managed crisis zones across 3 continents. Vanessa stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor of the chapel. A thin, nervous man in a gray suit flanked her side, their family attorney Harold Higgins. "Don't make this difficult, Diana," Vanessa muttered, leaning down until her perfume choked the air around me. "Harold has already filed an injunction against David's personal accounts. If you don't sign that waiver granting Julian full control over the firm, we'll freeze every asset you have. You'll be bankrupt before the flowers on David's grave even wilt." Harold cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses with a trembling hand. "Under current corporate statutes, Mrs. Mercer, protracted litigation will completely drain your personal savings within 3 months. Signing this relinquishment is your only financially viable option. Julian took the heavy pen from Harold's pocket and physically tapped it against my collarbone, letting out a cruel, patronizing sneer. Listen to the lawyer, you weak little widow. David isn't here to hold your hand anymore. You're entirely on your own. Sign the papers, take your crumbs, and get out of our sight before we leave you with absolutely nothing. I didn't blink. My expression remained carved from ice. Beneath the black lace cuff of my morning dress, my thumb rested against the bezel of my tactical smartwatch. With 2 precise, rhythmic taps against the dial, I transmitted a silent, encrypted ping across a secure military frequency. It was a priority command signal to my unit's executive officer, transmitting my exact coordinates along with an active hostile civilian interference code. Julian interpreted my lack of response as total surrender. He shoved the pen into my fingers, his face twisting into a smug grin of triumph. Good girl. Put your name on the dotted line and accept reality. I looked up into his eyes and spoke with deliberate calm. You really should have checked who stood behind me first. Before Julian could process my words, a sharp, heavy thud echoed through the sanctuary. The tall, polished oak double doors of the chapel burst wide open, striking the wall with thunderous precision. Julian froze, his pen hovering mid-air, while Vanessa gasped and spun around in irritation. The entire room of funeral guests fell into an abrupt, stunned silence. Down the center aisle marched 20 service members in pristine dress uniforms, moving in flawless synchronization. Their medals caught the stained glass light, their polished black boots hitting the stone floor with the synchronized cadence of an iron machine. Every single operator carried themselves with an unmistakable aura of disciplined authority, turning the solemn chapel into an impenetrable perimeter. Leading the formation was my second-in-command, Master Sergeant Marcus Miller. Broad-shouldered, scarred along his left jawline, and standing well over 6 feet tall, he cut a formidable figure that immediately commanded the room. Flanking him was a sharp-eyed officer carrying a thick leather briefcase stamped with the official Department of the Army Judge Advocate General seal. The vanguard parted with crisp precision, forming a double-flank honor guard along the pews. They secured every exit, their presence instantly neutralizing the suffocating arrogance Julian and his entourage had brought into the room. Julian's face flushed red with sudden outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" he yelled, trying to regain control. "This is a private family service. Who authorized this circus? Get these people out of here right now." Master Sergeant Miller didn't even acknowledge Julian's existence. He marched straight to the front of the altar, stopped 2 paces before my pew, and snapped to an immaculate attention. The heels of his dress shoes clicked against the marble like a rifle shot. In unison, all 20 operators snapped their right hands to their brows in a crisp, sharp military salute. "Captain Mercer, ma'am." Miller's deep voice resonated through the entire sanctuary, clear and commanding. "Vanguard unit standing by for orders. Area secured." The arrogant sneer on Julian's face evaporated in an instant, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw slacked, his eyes darting frantically between Master Sergeant Miller, the 20 motionless soldiers lining the aisle, and me. Beside him, Vanessa took an involuntary step backward, her hand flying to her throat as all the color drained from her face. "See, Captain," Julian stammered, his voice cracking down to a high-pitched rasp. "What do you mean, Captain? She's an office clerk. What is going on here?" The JAG officer stepped forward, opening his leather briefcase with calm, deliberate professionalism. He removed a certified federal dossier stamped with official seals and held it squarely in front of Harold Higgins. "I am Major Thomas Reynolds, United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps," he announced, his voice slicing through the heavy silence. "Mr. Higgins, you and your clients are actively attempting to coerce an active-duty commanding officer during a state of declared operational bereavement." Harold stared at the paperwork, his eyes widening in mounting terror as he read the federal jurisdiction codes. Major Reynolds turned a cold gaze toward Julian. Prior to his passing, Mr. David Mercer established a Joint Defense Tier Family Irrevocable Trust, fully integrated under federal protective statutes. Under the Service Members Civil Relief Act and federal estate security laws, every commercial asset, intellectual property right and physical property belonging to David Mercer automatically transfers to Captain Diana Mercer. Any attempt to file fraudulent injunctions or coerce asset relinquishment constitutes a felony violation of federal extortion statutes. Harold dropped his pen, turned utterly pale, and grabbed his briefcase. I was not informed of this, Harold whispered frantically to Julian. This is federal jurisdiction. If I touch this estate, I will be disbarred and prosecuted before the sun sets. You're on your own, Julian. Without looking back, their attorney rushed down the side aisle and vanished through the chapel doors, abandoning Julian and Vanessa in the center of the room. Julian stood frozen, clutching the useless waiver as cold sweat beaded across his forehead. He swallowed hard, attempting to force a nervous, conciliatory smile onto his trembling lips. Diana, please listen to me, Julian stammered, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of peace. This was all just a colossal misunderstanding between family. We were only trying to help you carry the burden during such an overwhelming time. You know how much Vanessa and I loved David. Save your breath, Julian, I said, my voice quiet, flat, and chillingly distinct. I stood up from the pew, smoothing the fabric of my dress, my posture commanding and unbroken. I opened my small handbag and pulled out a slim laminated folder, letting it drop with a sharp slap onto the empty seat between us. While David fought for his life in the intensive care unit last week, you accessed his private business server, I stated calmly, locking my gaze onto his. You attempted 3 unauthorized wire transfers totaling $450,000 to your offshore holding firm. What you didn't know is that David's network is monitored under Department of Defense Logistics Infrastructure protocols. Every keystroke, every IP log, and every fraudulent digital signature you forged was automatically flagged, recorded, and archived. Vanessa gasped, clutching Julian's arm as her face twisted in utter panic. Julian, tell her she's lying, she shrieked, but Julian couldn't manage a single word. He looked like a man standing before a firing squad. Federal marshals and local authorities have already received the full criminal referral packet, I continued, gesturing toward the doors. Master Sergeant Miller, remove these 2 individuals from the sanctuary immediately. They have desecrated my husband's memory long enough. With pleasure, ma'am, Miller responded. 2 stone-faced operators stepped forward, gripping Julian and Vanessa firmly by the elbows. Julian tried to pull away, but the grip on him was absolute iron. They dragged them down the center aisle in front of every business partner, extended family member, and guest who had gathered to pay their respects. Vanessa sobbed hysterically in humiliation, while Julian stared at the floor, completely shattered, exposed, and disgraced before being cast out into the rain. With the doors shut and the sanctuary cleared of malice, a serene, sacred calm returned to St. Jude's Chapel. My unit did not depart. Instead, they assumed positions along the perimeter, standing at rigid, reverent attention as an honorary guard for the man who had always supported my service from the shadows. I walked slowly up the altar steps to the podium, placing my hands on either side of the wooden lectern. I looked out over the gathering of David's true friends, loyal colleagues, and mentors. For the first time all morning, the hard armor around my heart softened into tender remembrance. David was a builder, I spoke, my voice ringing steady, clear, and full of warmth. He built bridges, he built foundations, and most importantly, he built a life anchored in unwavering integrity, love, and quiet strength. He never sought praise or stole credit, and he never compromised his values for easy gain. I paused, looking toward his casket, a faint, proud smile touching my lips. He gave me a safe harbor to return to after every storm. Today we do not let greed or cowardice define his memory. We honor his brilliance, his kindness, and the enduring legacy he leaves behind. After the service concluded, I stood by the chapel steps under the clearing afternoon sky. The grief was still a heavy ache in my chest, but the fog of uncertainty was entirely gone. Julian thought I was a fragile target, broken and alone in the dark. He was wrong. I was Captain Diana Mercer, unbroken, carrying David's memory forward, surrounded by the brothers and sisters who would always watch my flank.